Welcome to the Bare Metal Cyber CRISC Prepcast. This series helps you prepare for the exam with focused explanations and practical context. Data privacy is a cornerstone of modern risk management because it addresses the fundamental right of individuals to control how their personal information is used. Whether an organization operates locally or globally, mishandling personal data can result in severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and financial loss. Privacy violations are no longer isolated compliance issues. They represent enterprise-level risks that intersect with cybersecurity, legal operations, and public trust. Today's organizations must manage privacy risk with the same rigor as any other form of operational or information risk. For CRISC professionals, the role is not just to implement controls, but to ensure that privacy policies align with business objectives, risk appetite, and operational realities. On the exam, scenarios that involve weak privacy oversight or unclear ownership often point to strategic control gaps. Core privacy principles serve as the foundation for designing policies and implementing effective safeguards. These principles begin with lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Organizations must have a legitimate, clear purpose for collecting data, and they must explain that purpose to users. Purpose limitation requires that data only be used for the specific reason it was collected and no more. Data minimization means that only the data absolutely necessary to achieve the intended purpose should be collected, reducing unnecessary exposure. Data must be accurate and complete to remain useful and to avoid harmful outcomes. Storage limitation mandates that data should not be retained longer than needed and should be disposed of when its purpose is fulfilled. Confidentiality and integrity require that data is protected through appropriate security measures. Accountability means the organization must be able to demonstrate compliance, not just claim it. On the exam, you will need to match real-world scenarios to these principles and recognize where a principle has been violated. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other podcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Personally identifiable information, or PII, refers to any data that can be used to identify a person, either directly or indirectly. This includes obvious items like names and identification numbers, but also IP addresses, login credentials, and combinations of data points that reveal identity. Some types of PII are considered sensitive, such as racial background, biometric data, medical records, financial details, or real-time location information. These require more stringent controls because the impact of exposure is much greater. Organizations must maintain a classification and inventory of PII so that it can be properly protected, tracked, and controlled. Failure to do so can lead to uncontrolled risk and regulatory violations. On the exam, expect scenarios where data type, control strength, and classification must be aligned. Questions may imply a problem, such as a breach involving sensitive data without encryption, and the best answers will involve recognizing that PII classification should have driven stronger controls. Global privacy regulations define what organizations must do to protect personal data, and how they must respond to incidents or user requests. The General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union is among the most comprehensive, requiring consent, clear communication with data subjects, breach notification within 72 hours, and steep penalties for non-compliance. The California Consumer Privacy Act and its updates under the California Privacy Rights Act give consumers the right to opt out of data sales and require businesses to maintain transparency about data use. HIPAA governs the protection of health information in the United States, and other countries have introduced similar laws, such as the LGPD in Brazil, PIPEDA in Canada, and the PDPA in Singapore. While the exam does not expect memorization of legal text, it does require understanding how these regulations shape risk decisions and control requirements. When facing a question about privacy compliance, look for answers that reflect operational changes, such as added controls, policy updates, or clarified user communication. A core element of privacy compliance is the recognition and support of data subject rights. Individuals must be able to access their own data, request corrections, and in many jurisdictions request deletion under the right to be forgotten. They may also have the right to move their data to another provider through data portability or to object to how their data is used. Additionally, users must be informed when their data is collected and understand how it will be used. These rights require the organization to have operational mechanisms in place to respond quickly and consistently. This includes ticketing systems, verification steps, and logging to demonstrate compliance. On the exam, when a scenario presents a missed or delayed user request, it often points to a failure in supporting user rights. CRISC professionals must ensure that both controls and processes are in place to meet these rights in a timely and verifiable way. Privacy by design and by default means embedding privacy considerations into systems and workflows from the beginning, not tacking them on after development is complete. This includes minimizing what data is collected, encrypting or masking fields that are sensitive, and building access controls into data views. Logging access to personal data is essential so that unauthorized actions can be detected. Default settings should favor user privacy, such as using opt-in rather than opt-out models for marketing communications. Privacy by design is both a technical and cultural practice. Teams must be trained to ask privacy questions early in development, procurement, and configuration decisions. On the exam, scenarios that reveal privacy controls added only after a breach are typically signaling a failure of this principle. The best answers will reflect early planning, integrated controls, and intentional system design that prioritizes user data protection. Legal justification for processing personal data must be clear and documented. Consent is one such basis, and it must be freely given, informed, specific, and revocable. In other words, users must be told what data is being collected and why, must have a real choice, and must be able to change their mind. However, consent is not the only lawful basis. Other justifications include contractual necessity, legal obligations, or the organization's legitimate interests, provided those interests do not override user rights. Each processing activity must be associated with a documented legal basis, and this must be retrievable during audits or investigations. If a scenario describes user data being used beyond the original stated purpose, it likely indicates a violation of either consent terms or legal basis documentation. CRISC professionals must ensure that data use is both legal and tracked, and that controls exist to prevent purpose creep or silent repurposing of collected information. Controls designed to protect personal data must be layered, context-specific, and aligned with the type and sensitivity of the data involved. Encryption secures data both in storage and during transmission. Pseudonymization replaces identifying fields with meaningless tokens, which allows data use for analysis without exposing individuals. Access controls determine who can view or modify personal data, and logs are used to trace when and how data was accessed. Retention and destruction policies help ensure that data is not kept longer than needed and that it is securely deleted when no longer required. Secure transfer protocols and endpoint protections prevent data leakage during normal operations. Privacy impact assessments are formal reviews conducted when processing involves high risk to individuals, such as surveillance or profiling activities. On the exam, the strongest answers will reflect a layered approach, contextual safeguards, and awareness of how technical and administrative controls reinforce each other. When a privacy breach occurs, organizations must respond quickly and transparently. Under regulations like the GDPR, a data breach that poses risk to individuals must be reported to the appropriate authority within 72 hours. Organizations must maintain an internal breach log, a clear escalation matrix, and designated points of contact for regulators. Pre-approved communication templates can help ensure that notifications to users and regulators are timely and complete. The incident response process must be privacy-aware, considering not only the cause and scope of the breach, but the specific risks to individuals whose data was exposed. Evidence must be preserved and actions must be logged to support post-incident analysis. Risk professionals play a key role in evaluating the risk impact of a breach, advising on notification thresholds, and ensuring that recovery aligns with compliance requirements. On the exam, breach response questions often hinge on timing, communication, and alignment with legal expectations. When answering CRISC exam questions related to data privacy, you must think in terms of rights, responsibilities, and verifiable controls. You may be asked, which control supports a specific user right, such as access, deletion, or masking. You might be presented with a scenario where something is missing, such as a consent record, a privacy notice, or evidence of data minimization. Some questions may ask which privacy principle was violated, requiring you to identify whether it was a matter of purpose limitation, retention, or transparency. Others will ask how an organization should respond to a new regulation, and the best answers will involve updating policies, implementing appropriate controls, and reviewing the PII inventory. The strongest responses show an understanding of how legal obligations and user rights connect to risk posture, operational safeguards, and governance programs. Aligning all three is the goal of modern privacy risk management. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Bare Metal Cyber CRISC Prepcast. For more episodes, tools, and study support, visit us at baremetalcyber.com.